Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for joining us for this afternoon's forum. On stage with me, I have James Thomas and Claire Wright. Pierre de Villiers will be joining us shortly, and unfortunately, we do have an apology from Jolene. So far this morning, we've heard several topics and issues within the Australian wind construction industry. We've talked safety, risk management, we've talked working remotely, requirements for crane crews to work safely, and we've just seen a very poignant presentation about why this is all so important, because everybody deserves maybe a little bit dirty at the end of the day, but to return home safely. I'm sure you'd all agree. So I think our first point of discussion, what I'd like to talk to you both about is what are the current safety records looking like in wind construction industry? Why is this forum so important?
I think a clean question would be twofold. What is the baseline in the wind construction performance? And this forum is very much about construction and not O&M. And what is the industry baseline in installation methods oversight? So who's overseeing the methods for installation? So the reason why I say that is we can talk about the global performance, where the Katniss data was talking about fatalities sitting at 220. The number of fatal accidents that contributed to those 220 deaths was 156, which indicated that there were multiple fatalities to a number of these incidents. The total number of accidents was 3,033. Now, this data is from 2000 to 2021, and the global performance can only capture 19% at best estimate. I've got links to the data to which I've sourced that. That's on my LinkedIn post where I talk about this, and in our discussion forum, there is the Australian Wind Construction Collective discussion forum where we talk about these things. The Australian performance, from my understanding, some of the largest wind projects in the country have been shut down. I certainly know one of my clients recently shut down his site. And this is after meeting the project manager 2 years ago who participated in the forum. And we, with all due diligence, has planned and engaged with industry and engaged with the forum, with Claire, with myself, personally, on Thursday nights after doing long weeks and days. So the global performance, I suppose, is in the Australian performance is from our own personal experiences on sites that have been shut down by the regulator. Sites where personally I've had lengthy debates with project directors on the merit and my position that a site should be shut down, and the various responses from others. So in terms of what is the industry performance, I think it's very important to ask, what is the industry performance in terms of oversight? What are the learnings from our regulators? What's the assurance model? What's the skills and experience of those monitoring? Certainly, I hope it's not in LNG, the measure of skills that was someone who'd recently got their Cert 4 from the regulator and their Levi jeans and Ray-Bans walking to a construction site. I certainly hope the standard's a lot higher than that. Now, that's a bit of a picture to paint. But the assurance, the roles of those providing the assurance is critical. And so asking the question of what is the baseline in the performance, there's a lot of signs from companies not being offered insurance in an ongoing manner for the frequency of incidents. I think a pivotal question is, what is the baseline of monitoring of these projects?
Do you find that the regulator's still catching up to this technology and the risks associated to a measure as well?
Look, I don't want to speak on behalf of the regulator, particularly when we've got 3 states of regulators here today, which is fantastic that they're here. I certainly think the challenge of the regulator is their role in itself. And look, I think the presence, from what I've seen online, one of the largest wind farms in Queensland, from last count, was over 200 prohibition and improvement notices. So there's certainly a presence. I certainly know a current client has had their principal contractor engage with the regulator. To what they're looking at, I can't comment. And to what insight they have, which is what's most key important. The one concern I have is when I hear that the focus of the regulator is locks on turbines and keys in vehicles. It's a bit of a story that I had on a major LNG project where the regulator was looking at industrial step ladders And I've walked past with my principal contractor, a very good colleague of mine I've known for many years, and I've turned to him and said, "Mate, did you know old mate was hooked off on that crane hook over there?" And he's like, "No." I might have to just disappear and sort this out. And it's the question is then, in terms of the regulator, is how do they then internalise on themselves and their function and their skill sets? And I think to that end, they can add a lot of value, a terrible lot of value.
I think if I can jump in there as well, Nicola, I think that regulators have a very similar challenge in some ways to many of the supervisors on sites and the management teams themselves. A turbine is a very closed environment in that you have to have, before you even get close to it, there is drop zones in place. You need permission to enter the drop zone. You need permission then to enter the tower. You need permission. And then, of course, you need to get up it. There's a limited number of people you can have in the lift. There's a limited number of people you can have on the ladders. So one of the things that I guess the advantage, so a regulator that goes to a construction site can literally stand in various different locations on that site and see a number of jobs happening, see a wealth of things going on and those interactions between people at the same time. Whereas on a turbine site, you can't see a lot. When you're talking about internal things going on, you're not seeing very much on the outside at all. You might see the blade being lifted by the crane up the outside, but what you're not seeing then is all of the busy little ants running around on the inside and what they are or aren't doing, where they're hooked on, where they're not hooked on, and so on. So to be able to go and see that, it's a massive process to, get all your gear and equipment and get your permissions and actually get there. And by that stage, because everyone knows it's the boss is coming, quick, let's make everything right, which tends to be the case. So there's a number of those practices that we're not necessarily seeing. It's, as James was pointing out, you just walk along site and people are talking about doing the right thing. And all of a sudden you're like, did you notice we just walked past somebody doing the wrong thing? Did you want to go and sort that out maybe? Because, we're walking past these things all the time. It's one of the things that we see, particularly when we come to do refresher training, the mistakes that people are making, or they're just the bad habits, that bad habit that comes to things like, I'm going to open the hatch and then hook on. Well, there's a bad habit that someone's picked up somewhere that, again, your regulator is never going to see, because when your regulator is standing with you because you're escorting them through a turbine, you're on your game. You're going, right, hang on, wait, everybody stop. Wait, do this first. And that's how that works. So I think the regulators are up against some serious challenges. And there's a number of challenges that are seen everywhere throughout. And that's, your paperwork can only get you so far. Your documented procedures, your risk planning, your whatever else it might be, there are certainly, and look, we're seeing this across the board, this whole construction collective is all about what best practice looks like and trying to get best practices out there. It's the same thing for our regulators. If they don't know what good looks like because they haven't seen it before, then what are they really comparing what they're looking at to? It's a matter of understanding what it is that they need to see. I was involved recently, I'm involved with the GWO, I'm blowing my own trumpet here, James, but let me tell you, I'm involved with the GWO group. I'm involved in the team that's developing a new standard, which is really exciting. And one of the things that we're developing this standard in is because the auditors currently can be hoodwinked, basically. You can convince an auditor that you're meeting the standard without actually doing it. You can convince your auditors, because the standard isn't very specific, because it's just a bit open to interpretation, really. And so what we're getting is people out there who are convinced that they're meeting a standard when they're not really. It's an interpretation of it. And welcome, Pierre, good to see you. I'm sure that you have a number of examples of exactly that. That is where somebody has thought they're doing the right thing, or they professed to doing the right thing, whereas in actual fact, the real practices on the ground were something very different.
It's very true, I think. And look, being one of those auditors myself, I know that the majority of audits are a sampling of information rather than perhaps a deep dive into actual process. And especially in the last couple of years with COVID-19 and pandemic controls and border closures and difficulty in moving people around. I know in the industry that I'm currently working with, then my audits have all been virtual, and it can become a little bit of smoke and mirrors when you're being challenged through that sampling process, because let's face it, we're not showing anybody anything that we don't believe is spot on the money and good, are we?
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Pierre. We were just talking about the safety record in wind construction industry. I'd like to bring the conversation back to the greater culture, if I could. I think one of the underpinning things that we've been talking about throughout all of our presentations comes back to that original setting the tone and what kind of people and how do we promote positive culture and engagement from the client to the contractor to the worker on the ground. When we're dealing with high-risk industry, any high-risk industry, but particularly ones we're still learning about, granted at a very rapid rate, how do we find the right people and promote those positive behaviours effectively?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Nicola. It's in the past, it was a fantastic opportunity, especially when there's emerging industries. And I don't like using the word emerging industry because wind energy onshore and remote working is not new in a sense. I'm gonna just put it out there. But to a lot of people, no, it's not. But to a lot of people who are transferring skills, who are changing industries and looking for something different, it does become new to them. And the challenge is that new piece creates a bit of a conflict in terms of what you expect. And we talk about this a lot. If what you expect is what you get, then everyone's a winner, and then we don't have any anxiety and stress, and then that then break down relationships on site. If we can set the expectations of people coming into the industry in terms of what we show them, what they know before they get to site, you're really reducing that risk of confusion between what you expect and what you get. We used to learn that all the time about setting the scene in terms of the people that you bring on board. But because the context is what it is, Nicola, around the market, around the industry, around the available labor or talent pool people want to use now, it's really tough because you get into a position where people that maybe you would have wanted to bring onto your project, or skill sets that you would have wanted to bring onto your project, aren't available. Because let's just be clear, people go to the industries where they get the most reward, which has been in Asia in particular, has been offshore, and off they go. And then in between projects, we are lucky enough to get them for onshore wind, which is fantastic because they bring this real high risk adverse culture with them, and some of them bring this fantastic specific skill set where they know a lot about one particular thing, and that's fantastic, knowing a lot about one particular thing. But then you need 15 or 20 people like that who know the same level of knowledge around what they're doing, and it's hard for the teams to then share that knowledge if they're from different cultures, different backgrounds. And then we talked about language barriers and everything else. From my perspective, is it's a bit like a vessel going offshore or getting ready for a mobilization. The more time you spend up front in terms of understanding people, understanding their motivations, understanding their background and history, and don't just write them off because it's not exactly as the 10 things you want, the better your investment you get when they go to site. So it's a bit like buying shares. The more research you do in shares, and we know all these people who are now trading in crypto and just go, oh, here's some money. Oh, I've lost it. How did that happen? It's very similar to people. Oh, let's just grab all the people we can. Let's put them on seats and off they go to site. And then, oh, they've gone after a month. How did that happen? It's very similar. I always talk about shares, investment, and return on investment like I do about people and projects and work, because the principles are exactly the same. Yeah, that's sort of my perception.
And there's a skill shortage in pretty much every industry sector you can imagine.
It's got an unusual.
Sorry, James?
It's got an unusual side effect in for the installation companies as well, in as far as the companies that want to create value, deliver higher level standards of training, are left in a position where initially it's the upfront cost that's the challenge to their business. A trend setting in where the installation companies will train up they'll source the high standard training, they'll train their teams up, and in a sense, as Pierre said, like a football team from project to project, it used to be the case when the industry was a little bit more static and not as evolving and growing as rapidly. But what's happening now is we've got the labour market and those involved in the labour market and the supply chain poaching the talent pool, as you say, Pierre, and it's a real challenge for then the installation companies to say, okay, we're going to pay to the high standard, when some of the comments are, well, why would I do that when they're only going to be poached by an agency out of Singapore and put on a farm up the road? And these are the conversations I'm hearing, and it's a real challenge when installation managers know that, installation companies rather, know that it costs money for a quality product. It's a price versus cost. And if I want to invest in that pool within my own company, it just compounds. It compounds the challenge of engagement and creating that value front end via training and engagement.
James, one thing, so I've been talking to a lot of frontline leaders lately in different industries who we talk about this very point. We talk about turnover risk and the indirect effect on business and safety culture and the bath and the dye effect and how it goes down the drain. And we talk about our stuff a lot. And the one thing I said, what's the one thing we can do to give you the pedestal for success? What's the one thing you need to be able to be the best in your role and support the business? And they just say, look, Pierre, all I want is to work with people I know. That's it. Not more pay, not the best cars or, free gym memberships, whatever else. I want to work with people I know. Then I can be better at my job. And it sounds simple, but it's the biggest issue that everyone has got.
It's that classic trust game, isn't it?
Mm.
I don't know you. I don't know who you are. I don't know your background. I don't know how you work. I don't know your ethics and your values and any of those things. I don't want to come and play with you until I know you. I'm not going to trust you to do a job until I know you. And I guess, Pierre, that's one of the things where we as a training group have actually pushed into training in Turbine as much as possible, in that we build the team there. So one of the recent training programs I did, we had an incoming site manager, we had a safety professional, we had some technicians, we had new guys. You said that wind is new. Wind was new to most of this group, just like mining is new to someone who's never been in it before. I think mining is a much more established industry already. So I think whilst wind is not new, it's just not as established as perhaps it could be. Anyway, in this training program, like I say, we had a number of different people there. And in doing those activities, we're obviously performing rescues, we're performing access areas, we're getting to different stages, and everybody has that moment. I think it's if you get to the top of a turbine and you open that hatch, the one that goes all the way down to the ground, and you don't have that moment of, oh, hang on a minute, are we okay here? No, we're all okay. We're okay. Then it's time to get out, right? If you're not having that moment before you actually, when you first do that, then you're in the wrong game. But it's having that moment with that group of people around you that all of a sudden you now know them because you've seen their moments, they've shared your moments back again, and it's those groups that now, of course, the manager that was on site may well look at one of those teams, one of those technicians who is a technician. They're not a leader, they're not an anything else, they're new to the wind game, but that's the person that he's going to go back and connect with because they were in training together. Like we experienced that being in a very tight little nasty space together and having to crawl all over each other and so on. I think that's one of the things where training can really help. And I think one of the challenges we have there is very much that then how do you get those people that are already trained and already familiar, that are the leaders in the game, how do you get them back involved and engaging with their teams, engaging with those people? A lot of the time what I'm hearing from groups in the industry is that our managers don't care about us. Our leaders are not caring about us. They do a pre-start meeting in the morning and then they send us out, and they don't care that we don't have enough vehicles or we don't have the equipment or the PPE order hasn't arrived yet. They just care that we're behind on the schedule. And I think that's one of the areas where we're really falling down, is that those people who are just wanting people they know, who are not getting the people they know to be able to engage with, well, you need to get to know them then. You need to learn who those people are. You need to spend time with them, and you need to spend time with them not just in a I'm directing to you, but you need to spend time with them in a let's do this job. You're allowed to get your hands dirty occasionally.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point, Claire, and it's about how do you create that environment. And you mentioned about training, but how do you so my one piece around teamwork is trust and shared experiences, lived experiences. How do you get that before you get to site? How do you get that before you how do you understand the risk, learn to mitigate it before you're exposed to it? So many years ago, and I'm not going to say too many because my hair is not grey enough yet. We're involved in we're involved in APA designing the Safe Supervisor Competency Program for offshore, and I loved it, and I really appreciated it. And one of my mentors was also involved in developing it with them, and it set a new bar around frontline competency offshore. And then since then, it's been really in my mind around investing in that frontline leadership, but creating shared experiences. So again, I'll go back to some principles in the military and sports. I felt so safe, and I felt so calm, and I felt so okay, because every person to my left and right, I knew exactly what they had to do and what their capability was, because I trained with them for months, if not years. And I go, so, and it's the same with our industry and work. So if it's a rigger, a crane operator, or a supervisor on my left, I go, okay, I know exactly what he or she is capable of, what their standard is, and what they accept, and they won't risk my life. And it's the same this way. But the problem is with creating teams like that, it takes time. And on a 6, 8, 1, 2, 3 month project, the time is not available. So how do you circumvent that type of bonding, if I can call it that, in a team to trust each other with a training environment? It's tough. It's tough.
But there's
Look,
a
it's
band.
very tough, and I think
There's a
Sorry,
band.
James?
Though. There's a
James,
Yep.
you go.
There's a bandwidth here, though, isn't there? We're talking about best practice of seeing the risk before we start. We're talking about building camaraderie. The alarming thing for me is when I did have that conversation with the new safety professional on the shutdown, Pierre, and he'd been on 3 wind farms for a principal contract. That to me for me, the safety isn't in the office, the safety isn't in the forms, the safety isn't in the risk assessment. At the end of the day, with all of those tools, they're not one magic pill. It's the engagement in field. It's the support at the task front. And it's the ability to be a coach, a mentor in the slips, create that culture where we're looking at habits and behaviours, we're looking at tools, we're having the conversation in a trusting environment. That's a relationship built. Yet, how does that occur if I've got the coaches and the leaders, as Claire said earlier, and it's very difficult for the regulator when they're not in turbine. Everything happens in turbine. I think that's just like everything. It's the right question.
You just got a bit of delay with you, James. Your connection might be a touch shaky. Claire, you were saying something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to James's point. I thought he'd stopped for a moment there. It's one of the things that we're trying to combat in that Job Ready for Wind program. So it's part of that it's the training and the starting point, but it starts at the very beginning. It starts with that motivational induction, and it's part of how we can actually engage the leadership of the site to let their teams know that they are actually being looked after, they are being catered to, and they are, of course, being thought about at the very start of the project. It's very hard, Pierre, as you point out. It would be fantastic if we had construction teams, if we had a project team that got together and that did spend 2-3 months together in the planning and did those team building exercises. I mean, that's where team building comes from, right? Because you need a solid team, a unit to walk into that together. The Job Ready, the motivational piece that starts that whole thing is all about, these are the rules that we've set out for you. We want you to engage in that. We want you to work as a team as you progress now through this. each team is going through this. So each small unit that does this training is going to create their own contacts in that. And of course, then that team has contacts to this team, and the overall, the leadership that have put out these, this is the plan, this is our project baseline, then has to engage in that themselves. And I guess what we see a lot of is that where they start out really well with that engagement and so on, they lose it halfway through the project because everybody else then joins in. It's not, we've started out with a great team, we've got a really nice team atmosphere going on when it comes to our civil guys and our trenches and whoever it might be starting off. And then everybody else comes in, and it's all of a sudden we go from a site that might have, 20, 40, 50 people on it to all of a sudden there's 200 people in our site, pre-start meetings and so on. And you don't have the same, it's not the same thing when you've all of a sudden exploded like that, and you lose that sense of team. And I think that's one of the things that we're really trying to do is get back into those senses of team and go, you do go out and work in Turbine and nobody can see you. So let's make sure that you do feel connected in some way. Make sure that it's not a scary thing to pick up the phone and talk to your project manager, your supervisor, or somebody else's supervisor about what's going on. I mean, we've all had plenty of examples. Sorry, James.
And we've spoken at length, Pierre, and you've been part of those conversations with installation directors who are very comfortable in that small team space where organically they engage their teams, they measure the competencies, they have buddy systems, and they're not afforded the time and resources to have as much ability to have a structured program that you'd expect to see for a 100 turbine site. Are they less effective? You'd argue they're more effective. They understand their people, they understand what's required for positive outcomes in their work. And then when we ask ourselves for major projects and why we're here having the conversation is this can be achieved on major projects in the mega scale projects I've been involved in. Pierre, while you were offshore, I was onshore with the Worley Parsons team, and they had a strategy and they had a behaviour-based safety program, a little different from Job Ready. Ours is very much interwoven into the framework. But then it needs to be that Roman approach as opposed to the Celtic where it's structured, it's regimented. And then in terms of communication, it's a live process, which is why we've got the pilot program, not suggesting these are tablets from Moses. We are trying to create something with our industry partners as something that's an evolving journey that challenges the norm, that breaks down the complacency and puts in place, I suppose, the conversation to say, hey, we're smart, we're a dynamic country, we are multi-skilled in what we do, and we're going to move with the times. Because when I look around the forum and our quarterly meetings that we have, we are moving with the times. There's installation companies coming to that forum that are doing some great work. And as you said, Pierre, let's share those successes. And I certainly think in that engagement piece, for the clients in the room, the regulators in the room, ask that question, what's your strategy and how are you creating value in workforce engagement?
We're promoting a lot of healthy discussion here. I'm sorry to interrupt, Pierre. I just want to sort of guide this a little bit too to a greater expansion. Talking about the basis of the contracts that manage the interfaces and the contractual relationships between multi-stakeholders in these large capital projects. We have a comment from one of the cohort that's suggesting that in the many contracts that they've personally viewed that the approach seems to be more combative as far as versus collaborative risk acknowledgement and shared treatment.
It's certainly the case. The commercial frameworks change depending on which client you're speaking to. The role of PC is a big one for foreign companies. They're not familiar with the role of PC, and a number of the install companies are appreciating, hey, we're an OEM, we're a manufacturer, we're not good at this PC stuff, so we don't want it. So then, in turn, the commercial structure that's reflecting one thing is commercially argued pre-mobilisation. And in terms of being combative, I think OEMs and potentially clients are appreciating the risks associated with being a principal contractor and an installation contractor. Perhaps the energy within the procurement and supply chain could be spent on finding solutions rather than trying to get out of it, would be a frank yarn I'd have at the pub. Certainly the structures provide various degrees of risk for the stakeholders, and they will be combative in a commercial setting. The challenge for the safety professionals is to say, work up front prior to the project in the planning phase. How can we structure and appreciate the risk commercially in how our contracts are being raised? And ask another question. How does this commercial structure introduce further risk? How does this commercial structure provide a level of assurance? And how does this commercial structure, in this case, remove that combative position between the various stakeholders and create a shared team? And I'll finish it with one point. When I worked at Gladstone GLNG plant and port, the reason why I fell in love with that team was that the director recruited a team based with the same values. That is, we work with our contractor Bechtel. We have a shared objective. Support your contractor. Don't be a hindrance. And by having those values to build relationships, I even got tutored off my own contractors, safety professionals. James, how can you help us? How can you create paths of least resistance for us? How can our relationship mean that I can do my job better and we both have better outcomes of safety on a $19 billion LNG facility? And that all comes back down to having those commercial arrangements early discussed in the planning phase. And I have a client that's doing that right now. The outcomes, though, which is then, and I'll finish it, is it is combative because some people don't want to appreciate their responsibilities also.
The leadership really does set the tone, don't you think, Pierre? We had a comment when James was presenting earlier. I know that you threw one up there, and we were talking about clients having more robust ways to actually set the tone and the culture for the greater contractor base.
I think they do. The challenge is everyone's under different pressures, and James just mentioned about success and our values and what are our goals, and I think at the offset, when everyone sits in the room and the client or the operator says we want X, and the contractor says we can do X and whatever else because we want the work. The challenge with that is once you get on the ground and X then means this, and this is what really gets me because I care about people a lot. And from a work perspective, I try and separate my passion to care for people to my drive for the business to succeed and for us to make sure that we're compliant as a business, blah, blah, blah. So what happens is that X on site turns into, right, project manager or project director, your KPI for the next 8 months is to do everything with nothing. See you later, bye. And then what happens? And then everyone suffers. Everyone's under pressure. Everyone's under the pump. And then it rolls into vehicles, equipment, and PPE and everything else. So if we get that X factor to be something else, which means, right, I'm a client, I'm partnering with you. So what that means is that your risk is my risk. So what that means, if there's a violation with the regulations, if something illegal happens on my site, which includes people getting hurt, but also regulatory violations and equipment damage, then we are both liable, culpable as act or omission in terms of the work, and we are both going to suffer. So until that attitude comes across, that the risk is both of ours, and this includes psychosocial risk management as well. So i.e. people going off site because they are tremendously stressed because of the workload, the working hours, the lack of equipment, all these type of things. So unless the client comes forward with a collaborative approach that the risk is ours, so rip the check in half, and at the end we put it back together again, then all the rest of it is going to fall down into the master-slave, parent-child relationship the whole way through. And look, to some extent, that has to exist, because don't forget, the ultimate accountability for the people instigating the project and with the investment that have a duty of care to the shareholders, that's always going to be at the top of the chain. But when it comes to execution and doing the work, that collaborative approach, and thanks Juan for that point, solely comes down to who is implementing the contract on both sides in terms of the EPC and the contractor. And that can be on Monday, I'm really in a bad mood, I'm upset and stressed and everything else, so therefore I'm going to hammer the contractor. Or on Tuesday, I'm very happy, they're doing a good job, they've put up 3 turbines in 3 days, wow. So we're going to be nice to them for a week. And that volatility is so hard because the inconsistent in application of contracts is so common. And I see it, we all see it, that the application of a contract on the site is very much cemented into the way that the client representative wants to behave on site and the way that the contractor representative wants to behave. And those things for me are so volatile and can change. The rest of it is hard then to maintain as consistent if those two key factors aren't able to be consistent. So yeah, it's a bit of a here and there answer. Sorry, Nicola, but it very much, I believe the client has a huge influence. They have a huge accountability, but when it comes to the execution of the contract, they need to remain consistent, I think is very important for me.
Could
James,
I
go, please.
Just quickly, I'd just like to add on that, and Nicola, I wouldn't expect an answer here, but it does beg the question. Connecting Industry and have done many ICN conferences. In fact, the Renewable Industry Conference was just held. A question that's in my mind, and one I don't expect to be asked, has this topic been raised in any of these forums between Melbourne, online, in relation to the commercial structures and the risk that it either deduces or increases?
Independently as its own topic, not as a specific presentation, but the projects that did present at the Renewables Conference did talk at great length about building positive culture, about community engagement, about appropriate planning and obtaining the same skill sets. Possibly not the same emphasis on training that we've discovered or ventured down today. Appreciating, of course, that those presentations were more surrounded in procurement opportunities in the actual planning stages and development of the teams.
Okay.
What I would like to ask of you, James, as the founder of the Australian Wind Construction Collective, the minds that sit at that table and the work that you've all done already, and I've only been on this journey with you for a short time, and I've thoroughly enjoyed learning about the collective. What's the next step? Where to from here? How do we change maybe some of those opinions at high level so that the leaders in this industry are very clearly setting the tone for change?
This is, I suppose, back to relationships, isn't it? It's trust, it's respect, and it's having a shared journey. This has been a shared journey with Pierre and I, a shared journey with Claire. Claire's been, quite frankly, we've been back-to-back partners in doing all the legwork in this. The shared journey with Jolene, where she is a very busy director of multiple businesses, we're reputedly known to be on the phone after our meetings for 2 hours at a time, and the 4.5-hour Thursday phone calls intermittently through this journey. And then how does that look then in terms of clients having their relationships with the right people and being able to practically get to the weeds and understand there might have been talks in commercial structures and planning at a motherhood higher platitude level. But I'd suggest in where to from here is the quarterly forum will continue, where these journeys will continue. We've got technicians, technical advisors. There's a chap in here today, I won't name and shame, who's been along for the entire journey. There's been installation directors in Kim and Brett who have been tremendously supportive, engaging, many phone calls. I can remember the days in the rain talking to Kim about the procurement supply chain off my way to the airport in Melbourne and listening to the pains of the directors. So where to from here? I'm heading to my late 40s now. I have a bit of knowledge. I don't call myself a specialist. I know more than most in this topic. We've done a lot of work as a collective team, and I'd like purpose as a profession. And I think the collective team in the safety forum that's now quarterly is the same like-minded professionals. We learn off each other. Mannerisms and some of the things, aspects of Pierre's background, I've learned so much in terms of making safety personal. I learn from the collective. I learn from Claire. I'm motivated by these people. And if clients start sharing that journey with like-minded people, it can only bring them success. It can bring them strong relationships in a very challenging environment where they feel supported. I can tell you I'm a very flawed human being. My wife is the first one to tell you all about that. And to that end, it's a human experience that we have, and without being too mushy, that we have to work together in this, and we have to create a shared objective. I mean, and to close it off, the community is so fragmented online and so negative, and it's clickbait. But I feel good going into our quarterly forums. I feel good picking up the phone from Claire and Pierre, the technical advisors from installation companies, site managers in the middle of central Queensland having their dramas that they're dealing with. So, yeah, look, as long as there's strong relationships with competent people and they start asking the right questions, come to the quarterly forums if you're interested. So,
how does the delegation engage with the quarterly forum and with the collaborative committee? How do they engage with you all and become more involved?
I guess having a prescriptive objective. That first 18 months, we had an agenda with measurable outcomes. We had to look at what does a mobilisation, induction and training framework look like, and we squirreled away and we did our homework. We weren't dealing with motherhood statements. We had an agenda that involved hard work that then reduced the size of the forum meeting to those who are willing to roll their sleeves up and do the work. So I guess from there, it's lots of phone calls. There's lots of apologies because there's a COVID lockdown on their site. And there's some great experiences. I was in 2-week isolation in Auckland, September the year before last, and we did our pilot program for Job Ready. And between walking in a basement downstairs, I was able to meet up with another series of installation directors who sat through the Job Ready induction program. So it's through conversations and then through a more formal process of meeting. Initially it was monthly, and now we just meet quarterly.
Yeah. I'll get, if I can, and not to wrap it up too quickly, but we are running behind schedules and I have some speakers queued up for the next presentations as well. So if I could get a final thought, first from you, Pierre.
Such a big topic, Nicola, to have one final thought. I'll have to try and fish one out. So from my perspective, I don't think any of us can use the excuse of the labour market and turnover anymore. It is something that we are beating with a stick, and it is a cement context. So it is no more a scapegoat for all these things that are being a challenge. I think it's just the context that we live in until it changes. So building and have the foundation of a strong culture all the way down from when we sign the contract, as one mentioned, the relationship that we're creating and building that trust, and will only survive if we have good people in our business that work with each other and they stay. Obviously, I do circle then back to the whole retention piece, but I'm not going to say that's the issue. That's the opportunity, is to have good people, good experience to stay. But as I said, there are all these pre-existing biases that we have, preconceived biases that sit in our mind around remote working and small teams. We have to try and escape those because everything's changing. And the one thing, James, we talk about this, the one thing that the last 2 years of this connectivity has taught me is how disconnected we are as human beings. And that is a cut that will take a long time to repair in terms of our skill sets with each other, our emotional intelligence, empathy, and all those things. That's it.
100% agree. James? Final thought from you?
I think that I think I might resonate and leave it to Pierre's position. There's a lot of excuses. There's a lot of excuses and an acceptance of our position. And my final position is, and I'm going to quote you, Pierre, we need to make this personal. Spend some time on your project. Spend some time in Turbine. Make it personal. If you are a director, if you're an operations manager, understand what's happening at the task level. Understand what the challenges are and make it personal. If you find it hard to motivate, picture your wife or your kids out there in that high-vis and think about how would you want your leaders, if we're leaders, why do we do the things we do? And my closing point would be that Pierre, Claire, myself, and many of those leaders who attended those forums, it was an obligation to be there. The directors that attended felt obliged from their experiences. It wasn't an aspiration, hey, let's start a safety forum, it sounds interesting. Hey, let's do a conference, that sounds like fun. I'm a potato with IT and I've had to learn this platform. And we're doing this out of obligation from shared and individual experiences in remote projects under specialised lift planning. Make it personal. Understand your risk.
If I may pull us up there just with the delay to sort of save the time. And Claire, I know that you would join me in resonating with Pierre and with James in reiterating that we need to lead from the very top and properly orientate people in this industry sector and make sure that they're not only appropriately trained, assessed and competent, but engaged and understanding of all of the greater tasks, maybe not just so focused on their own, which often happens. Thank you all so much for your time. If you'd like to continue any discussions with our panel this afternoon, you can see them either at their booth or in the networking area. I'd like to thank James Thomas, Pierre de Villiers and Claire Wright. Thank you all very much. Healthy discussion.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
And if you'll stay...